As part of the many instructions I received upon my arrival in Austria as a missionary for the church years ago, we were instructed that if we happened upon any members of the SS, we were forbidden expressly from preaching the gospel to them. As a consequence of the nation where I served as a missionary, of the time when I was there, and of the political circumstances of that country post-war, it was my dubious experience, I guess, although illuminating in many ways, to have tracked it into several members of the former Nazi Party, several of whom were SS. And just so that you know that I'm a little bit legitimate in this case, there were at least 3 instances that I can recollect. The first one that I recollect was at the Naschmarkt in Vienna, which is a sort of flea market. And we were sorting through, looking at the collectibles for souvenirs to take home. A man pointed to me and he says, "I know what you want." He pulls this brown paper bag out from under the table and pulls out an SS officer's watch cap with the death's head skull on the front. And I thought, historically relevant as this might be, I don't want to have this, because you know what people will assume if you own these things. Several months later, we tracked it into a house, offered them a Book of Mormon, and the man said, "I have a book for you," and returned with an original, script-written, leather-bound copy of Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf. And then somewhere outside Salzburg, about a year after that, I ran into a man who offered me an original copy of Die große weiße Rasse. So we would come home and take our maps. Austria had really good maps that showed every building, and we marked them in indelible ink to make sure that missionaries knew not to go back to that place, because that was a place where we were forbidden to preach the gospel. So I find it both personally and professionally repugnant that Willard, still unwilling to admit he's not the President Romney, has the gall and audacity to go out there and cast the aspersion of Nazis towards anyone. Anyone. Mitt, I want to know, have you ever met a Nazi? Have you ever met a real one? And I don't mean people you don't like. It seems like the word Nazi now is nothing more than a pejorative bandied about with reckless abandon that means anyone whom I happen to politically disagree. And it is used mostly to shut down members of the opposition, because like most ad hominems, it requires then the respondent to defend themselves against an unfounded accusation, because obviously the emotional attachment to that word sort of buries any other argument that may be made. And the pejorative and the use of the term Nazi is almost always illegitimate, because the Nazis are too convenient of a scapegoat to be used with any legitimate claim in our modern political parlance or in our interpersonal conversations regardless. They are by far and large the creepiest people I have ever met on the planet. And I was glad to have been told to leave them alone. And I felt relieved to be gone. I felt relieved to go away from them. And the people that Willard Romney is slandering and libeling with this term, I don't think I've met very many of them, but I really have the sneaking suspicion that if I were to meet them, I would walk away from them with a much different experience than I did from these individuals. And yet he is not criticized for these personal attacks. He's not required to substantiate any evidence, to back it up, let alone to provide proof. And we all know that evidence and proof are used interchangeably by the media as if they're somehow synonymous. But Willard, dude, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as a self-determined Christian, as a Republican, as a man, why are you talking about anyone with these terms, unless they actually are one? I mean, it's different when you knock on the door, a guy comes to the door, "Oh, here's my SS uniform, I was an Obersturmführer, I was a whatever, Unterscharführer," or whatever they were. And I look at the uniforms and I'm like, shit, this is an SS guy. We have got to get out of here. And of course, looking at me, yes, I definitely fit the Aryan symbology, and that's probably why they just assumed based on looking at me that I agreed with them. But Willard, you look almost Aryan too. I mean, if that's the thing, then you're just as likely to be visually lumped in with them as anyone else who's been visually lumped in with them. And so the whole notion of using this particular ad hominem personal attack in order to gain face is not going to gain you any face. Anyone with half a brain knows that using the pejorative of Nazi is a cheap shot and a cheap trick. There are almost no real Nazis in America. I mean, we have some borderline communists, and we have some people who think they're Nazis, but really some of the most fascist groups in America are the ones who claim that they're opposed to fascists, because that's what fascists do. If you know anything about Germany, then you know that the fascists always found someone else to say, hey, they're the ones who are going to try and take over the country, and so we should go get them first. It is a fascist tactic to label others as fascists. And I got to ask you, as a good, tithe-paying, card-bearing member of the church, how do you feel about Elder Dieter or Elder Busha? You claim to be a man who's enlightened. You claim to be a man who's a member of the church. And yet you speak of your brethren in the family of man as if they were already doomed to be cast by your wrath down to hell. It's pretty damn rammy-umptum. It's pretty damn ponky. And I've called you out on these things before. Not that you listen. I don't really expect Willard, I'm still unwilling to admit defeat Romney. That to anything that anyone says, he's a legend in his own mind and can do no wrong. And these kinds of people are exactly the kind of people who don't belong in leadership, because they're the ones who are unwilling to ever make mistakes. So I take a little bit of solace in the notion that although I'm also not a leader in the church, that neither is he. The brethren have been wise enough to, generally speaking, not elevate individuals to positions of church leadership who are also engaged in political fisticuffs and shenanigans. Because basically, let's face it, that's what Willard Romney's up to. He's there for himself. Now, I don't know if he was always that way. Never met him as a guy. The first I'd ever heard of him is when he ran for president. Didn't know him, didn't know anything about him. Wasn't a fan of him just because he's a member of the church, because not everyone who worships with you shares your faith. And the Republican Party, if they don't know this already, should know that just because you identify as a Republican doesn't mean you are one. Okay? Because calling yourself a cantaloupe makes you not a melon, and calling someone else a cantaloupe doesn't make them one either. And if I were one of these people, I'd push back. I have actually met some Nazis. I'm not excited about that. But I think that it entitles anyone that I know, if it entitles anyone I know to use that term, it entitles me to use that term, because I've actually met some. And until Willard Romney can demonstrate to me that he's met one, that he understands why they're aberrant and abhorrent, he needs to back it up or back it off. Because Capulets like this make blood in the marketplace. And this kind of rhetoric is never going to create unity and bring us together. This kind of rhetoric about our fellow men is completely unbecoming of a man in his office, of a man of his title, of a man who carries the priesthood, of a man at all. Because unless you actually are a Nazi, calling someone a Nazi tells me more about you than that pejorative tells me about them. I know that Nazis don't call each other Nazis. They have probably some other word, party member, I'm sure there was something to make it noble, to give it some air of noblesse oblige, to belong to the National Socialist Party. And it's ironic for me, knowing that Nazi stands for National Socialist, that a man in public elected office uses it to describe people who are against socialism. It's sort of like historically the Federalists, who are not actually for federalism, who called themselves that, so that Thomas Jefferson's party would have to call themselves the Anti-Federalists, with the implication that they were against federalism, even though it meant they were against the Federalist Party, where it becomes all of this word games and shenanigans, and the meaning of everything is lost. Because at the end of the day, this is about more than whether you like Willard Romney. This is about more than if you like Democrats or Republicans. This is about more than whether you think that Nazis are evil. This is about what you really think of the nature of man. Because all the people who believe that a Nazi is irredeemable are the people who would deny the Christ. I do not know if Hitler can be saved by Jesus. I don't know if Himmler can be saved by Jesus, or Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan. If you're John, I still haven't admitted defeat Kerry. Or Pol Pot, or tons of other megalomaniac, narcissistic psychopaths. Burke and Hare. I mean, those two dudes, they're pretty creepy too. Go look them up. I don't know if they can be saved, but I don't think they want to be. But if you say they can't, then you're actually Antichrist. Because you're denying the Christ. You're saying that Christ can't save them. That somehow they're lesser men. And the dehumanization of our fellow men is completely unbecoming of the title human being. Now, in case you can't tell, I don't like Willard Romney very much. That's why I call him Willard, because it's his actual name, so it's not really a pejorative, unlike the terms that he uses. And I'd like to remind Willard Romney that he's no Marion Romney, and that there may be a very good reason why he is all he's ever going to be. And as my final word to you, I would exhort you that when you should hear these words, if it be wisdom in God that you should hear them, that you consider how merciful the Lord God hath been unto you all this time, and take the chance to repent. If not, I fear your case will be awful. Because we have all been taught that with what judgment we judge, we shall be judged. And with what measure we mete, it shall be measured unto us again. And I fear that sometimes people will be punished with the punishments they wish on others. That people will be lumped in with those they decry the most and the loudest. And I have a sneaking suspicion that at Resurrection and Judgment Day, Willard Romney will be standing right next to these three Nazis that I met in Austria and feeling quite at home in their company, receiving the same judgments unless he repents. In fact, I think that's why you're still alive. It's why you were elected in Utah, to give you a chance to redeem yourself, to reform yourself, to turn to Christ, instead of telling the world that other people are servants of his enemy. The Antichrists never say they are Antichrist. They always pass that on to others. Now, for the rest of you who aren't Willard Romney, since this video is otherwise irrelevant and immaterial without the bigger picture, this is an invitation for all of us to consider how we speak of and how we act towards our fellow men. Are you a builder or a wrecker? And I'll end with this poem. I walked one day through a lonely town. Some workers were tearing a building down. With a ho-heave-ho and a husky yell, they swung a beam and a sidewall fell. I asked the foreman, are these men skilled? The kind you'd hire if you wanted to build? Oh, he cried, no indeed. Common labor, Mitt Romney, is all I need. Why, I can destroy in a day or two what builders have taken months to do. I asked myself as I went on my way, which of these roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who marks with care, measuring lives with rule and square? Or am I a wrecker who walks around content with the task of tearing down? I do not see how any man can really make the world better when he takes every opportunity to cut down people he does not know and does not like. I can only imagine how those towards whom he's cast these aspersions, because I'm sure there are particular individuals he means, feel having a knife thrown in their back. A true mit a. What kind of men are we? And what manner of men ought we to be? And if anyone is an example of what not to be, it's Willard Mitt Romney. May God have mercy on your soul.